It was spring, the time when kings would go off to war, but that year, David chose to stay behind. The mighty warrior who once led armies into battle now rested in the comfort of his palace. As twilight painted the skies, he climbed up to the rooftop. A soft breeze danced through the quiet streets of Jerusalem, and then he saw her. Down below, bathing in the purity of routine, stood a woman. Her name? He didn't know it yet. But in that moment, the king's gaze crossed the boundaries. Of honor, it wasn't just attraction. It was as if something had entranced him, desire, power, and a stirring in his chest he could no longer ignore. He could have looked away, he could have walked away, but he didn't. At that moment, the man after God's own heart made room for the man driven by the flesh. And that first step, silent, intimate, seemingly harmless, opened the door to a deadly sin, and what David did next would mark his bloodline forever. But before we uncover this mystery, if you haven't subscribed yet, click that button and turn on notifications so you don't miss stories like this one. Before the scandal, before the temptation, before the guilt, there was a man deeply in love with God. David wasn't just any man. He was the shepherd who defeated giants, the young boy forgotten by his brothers, but remembered by heaven. The same David who wrote psalms in the stillness of night and danced before the Ark of the Covenant, uncaring of who was watching. In 1 Samuel 13:14, God said something that still echoes today. I have sought out a man after my own heart. And that man was David, anointed as a child, pursued by Saul, fearless in battle, until finally he became king of Israel. His reign was a symbol of justice, faith, and divine covenant. David didn't just speak to God, he heard God's voice, and for that he was honored and feared. But what many forget is this: even the most spiritual can fall, and that's where the story starts to darken, because behind every light, there's a shadow. David wasn't just a king, he was the king, the most powerful man in Israel. Whatever he desired could be his. All he had to do was speak it, and everyone obeyed. His throne was secure, his enemies defeated, the people adored him. His soldiers followed him with blind loyalty. He had conquered everything. But something happens when a man reaches the top. The war is no longer outside. It begins within, and it's at that moment of comfort, stability, and false peace that many fall, not in battles on the field, but in silent temptations born from the heart. And it was in this time, when kings went off to war, that David stayed home. 2 Samuel 11:1. He should have been on the battlefield, but he stayed. And in staying, he opened the door to a moment that would change everything. It was as if heaven already knew something was about to happen, but no one, not even David, could imagine the price he would pay, and what came next was even more unbelievable. She didn't know. As she bathed, perhaps for ritual cleansing or simply for relief, Bathsheba was just a woman in a quiet, vulnerable moment. But eyes were upon her. From the height of the royal terrace, David watched. At first with surprise, then with desire. He didn't know her name, didn't care who her husband was. That didn't stop him. He sent for her. The Bible doesn't describe what she felt, but a king's command is not up for debate. And when she entered that palace, the story of humanity changed forever. Samuel 11:4 says, "And David sent messengers to get her. She came to him and he lay with her. It was quick, it was silent. But in the spiritual realm, an earthquake erupted. In that moment, the man, after God's own heart, gave in to the cravings of the flesh, and the woman, who had done nothing but exist, became part of a plan she didn't choose and couldn't escape. And what happened next shook even the angels. Days passed. maybe weeks. The sin was buried in the silence of the palace. No words were spoken, no confessions made. David went on with his crown, his feasts, his music, as if nothing had happened. But God's eyes do not close, and then the message arrived, simple, cold, final. I am pregnant. 2 words, heavy with life and judgment. They pierced David like an invisible sword, because this wasn't just a child. It was proof, the living testimony of a sin he tried to hide. A sin that now had a face, a form, a due date, and the silence of the palace began to scream. David the poet, David the worshipper, David the king, now stood as David the sinner, and fear began to do what repentance had not. It consumed his soul, but instead of kneeling, he plotted. Instead of confessing, he tried to cover it up. And what he did next pulled his soul even deeper. David had a choice. He could admit his mistake, but he chose to hide it. He could humble himself before God, but he chose to manipulate men. Bathsheba's husband, Uriah, was on the battlefield, fighting for David and dying for Israel. And now, David turned against him with a quiet conspiracy. He summoned Uriah, welcomed him with honor, offered wine, food, kind words, all with one purpose: to send him home to his wife. So the pregnancy would seem natural, but Uriah was too noble to fall for it. He refused the comforts of home while his comrades slept in tents, risking their lives. He slept at the palace gate, and when questioned, he answered with conviction, "How can I go home, eat, drink, and lie with my wife, while the ark of God and my fellow soldiers remain in tents and battle?" 2 Samuel 11:11. It was as if God himself spoke through Uriah, a mirror held before David's sin. But David didn't stop. He went deeper, and what he chose to do forever stained the name of the king. David couldn't risk scandal. He had to remove the living evidence, but he couldn't kill the child. So he chose to kill the man who revealed it, Uriah. And what he did next chills us to this day. David wrote a letter to Joab, the commander. Place Uriah in the front lines of the fiercest battle, then pull back so he is struck down and dies. 2 Samuel 11:15. And the most haunting part? Uriah carried that letter himself, the very sentence of his death, in his own hands. And so it happened. In the heat of war, Uriah was left exposed, alone, surrounded, and he fell, the faithful soldier, the honorable man, the loyal husband. He didn't die by the enemy's sword, but by the betrayal of the king he served. Uriah's blood now cried out from the ground, and David, he took Bathsheba as his wife, as if everything had been fixed. But in heaven, nothing had been forgotten, and God was preparing judgment. David believed he had won, that the scandal died with Uriah. That time would cover his tracks, but time does not erase what God still intends to reveal. And then Nathan entered the palace. He didn't come with wrath, nor with accusations. He came with a story. There were 2 men in a city, Nathan began. One was rich, the other poor. The rich man had many sheep and cattle. The poor man had just one little lamb which he raised with love, like a daughter. But when a traveler came, the rich man took the poor man's lamb and served it instead of one of his own. David heard this and burned with anger. "That man must die," he shouted. Then Nathan looked him in the eyes and said the words that still strike like lightning. "You are that man." 2 Samuel 12:7. Time stopped. The king broke. Guilt, shame, the weight of truth, it all came crashing down. The throne could no longer protect him, and what happened next changed David forever. He didn't argue. He didn't justify. He simply said, "I have sinned against the Lord." In 2 Samuel 12:13, Nathan replied, "The Lord has taken away your sin, but the child born from this will die." And with those words, grief filled the palace. The child became ill. David fasted, laid on the ground, wept. For 7 days, he didn't eat, didn't rise, begged God for mercy. Imagine a king on his face, the man after God's own heart, now broken, but on the 7th day, the crying ceased. The child was gone. David's servants feared to tell him, but David understood, and when he confirmed it, he did the unthinkable. He rose, washed himself, changed his clothes, and went to worship God. Yes, worship, even in mourning, even without answers. And he said, "He will not return to me, but I will go to him."